Welcome to Holy Week. We're so excited that wherever you are today, you took time out to be with us right here. And we encourage you, wherever you are, to make sure you subscribe on YouTube, follow us on Facebook, check in, and even share what you're about to experience today. Every single day, we're going to come to you live at this time so that we can walk through the final days of Jesus' life here on earth. As we begin Holy Week and as we walk through these moments together, each pastor is going to take an opportunity to share with you the final days of Jesus' life. Welcome to Holy Week.
Genesis Church, welcome to Holy Week. This is Holy Tuesday. We're so glad that you're here with us today. I'm Stephen. I am our student director. I oversee sports and outreach as well. I'm so excited for today. What a day Tuesday was. So Tuesday is a day that Jesus is consistently challenged. His authority is being challenged by religious leaders throughout the entire day. And he throws a parable at these religious leaders, and he just kind of throws them for a loop. This parable is in Luke 20, and it is the parable of the vineyard owner. And in this parable, he talks about how there's a vineyard owner, and he rents out to tenant farmers his vineyard. And these tenant farmers, they're taking care of the farm, taking care of his crop. So he sends his servant to go collect his crop, collect his percentage. And when he does that, this servant gets roughed up and sent away. He does it again with the second servant. Same result happens. He's roughed up, he gets sent away. Third time, he sends another servant. Same result happens. Finally, the vineyard owner says, you know what? Surely they'll respect my son. So he sends his son to go collect his crop. And the unthinkable happens. They decide they're going to kill the son and try to take ownership of the vineyard. So he tells this parable. And the religious leaders at this time were kind of in awe that they would be called out like this. They knew that this was directed at them. So the question must be for all of us, who is the vineyard owner? The answer to this question should determine how we live. So let's reveal some of these characters. The vineyard is Israel in this time. And the servants that are being sent are the prophets. The tenant farmers, those are the religious leaders. God is the vineyard owner, and the heir or the son is Jesus. And so, if God is the vineyard owner, and Jesus is the heir of the son, then the question is answered. That whose authority is Jesus working under? It's God's authority. He's God's son. He was sent by God. So they get their answer through this parable. Since God owns the vineyard, we must live accountable to him. God expects fruit from his vineyard. But Jesus also tells us that through this parable, he shows great patience and great love through it. God expects fruit. Like we said, that's the first thing that really hit me from this. If you're going to have a vineyard, why would you not expect fruit from it? That's what he was expecting. He wanted obedience. He wanted serving through the people that he sent to Israel. It was common during this time, if you owned a vineyard, that you would rent it out to tenant farmers. And the only thing you really asked for in advance, or at the end of it, would be your percentage of the crop. Well, during this time as well, these tenant farmers would have a really good life. They're living on farm. The only thing they really have to do is upkeep this farm. Keep the crop in good shape. They got a good place to live, and made a pretty good wage doing it. The only thing they had to do was give their percentage. And God, he expects and wants us to bear fruit. He wants us to live lives that show Christ-like people. He wants us to show that God is good. We should be able to bear fruit to where people taste and see that God is good. God's patience is shown in the number of servants that he sends. He sends 3 servants. This is something that should motivate us. We all deal with patience on a regular basis. In today's world, there's no doubt that this tenant owners would be locked up. and new faithful ones we put in place. But God was patient. He sends 3 servants until he ultimately sends his son. I mean, as a parent, think about this, right? These 3 servants are sent. They get roughed up, sent away. You ask your kid to do something 3 times. The 4th time, you're probably going to blow a gasket pretty soon. We all have patience issues, and God shows us how patient he really is. Jesus shows us in this parable how patient and gracious God can be. He sent his prophets to look over Israel and bear that fruit, and they just kept being turned away. If we truly examine the patience of God working in our lives, there's so many times where we fall into an old lifestyle or sin or whatever it happens to be, but God always sends somebody or a message to snap us back into reality where he wants us to be. And I had a huge example of that myself. I found myself at the University of Central Florida. I'm playing baseball there, and 3 years I spent there. 3 years, 3 servants. And it was crazy. I was surrounded by sin. I was surrounded by just a terrible group that it wasn't a good environment for me. And then I encountered all these injuries. One of them was a shoulder surgery that could have ended my career. Another one was a heart surgery that could have ended my life. And another one, just randomly, freak incident that I woke up one day and half of my face was paralyzed. It was God clearly sending messages I had to get out. He had been patient enough with me that the life I was living was not what he had in mind for me. And eventually I head up to Tennessee and I find a school. It's a Christian school. And I'm doing Bible studies in the basement of our coach's house. And this is where I find Christ. I remember going on a visit there and I had no idea what I was doing there or what this feeling was that my dad and I had when we went to visit this place. But ultimately now I look back and I'm like, man, that was God showing us exactly where I needed to be to get my life where it needed to go. And so the patience that he's shown with me was unbelievable. And I know we all have these experiences. And now the greatest motivation is the fact that he loves us so much that he sent his one and only son. So he sends his son down to earth for us. And God sends people into our lives all the time, and I think about it this way too with my family. I am a firm believer that God put my wife Anna in my life to set me straight and hold me accountable. I do believe that both times I held my daughters for the first time, that God put both of them in my life to make sure I'm on the right track every day. And it's just such a blessing to be able to receive that love that God has for us. The tenets of this vineyard, let's go back to that. Or if we're even referring to religious leaders, they wanted to own the vineyard. That's why they killed the son. They wanted to own religion in Israel. That's why they had a plan in place, and they're trying to find a plan to be able to kill the son, who they didn't even know who it was at the time. But Jesus is telling them, I know what you're doing. Martin Luther once said, if I were God, and the world had treated me the way it has treated him, I would kick the wretched thing to pieces. And that's so true of many of us. Many times we just disobey what God has in mind for us and try to go our own way. And it's a perfect example of what was done with Jesus during this Holy Week. God's Son in flesh comes down to earth to take away our sin, and that is the greatest love. He died for us. Later on this week, the least we can do is live for him. And so, looking back at all of this parable has just hit me in so many different ways. And this life and this world can beat you up and kick you out of the vineyard, but it's our job to remain faithful. It's our job to remain obedient in all of this. We're made to bear fruit for the vineyard owner. There's a small town in New York where I was a really young kid that we go back and visit. And first-timers, every time they came into town, would slam on their brakes. First time in town, they knew it. Boom, slamming on the brakes. And the reason being is right behind that welcome sign was this cop car. And before you realize that there's a traffic dummy in the front seat, you're already hitting your brakes. And so this was an example that I thought of, is that, wait a second, this dummy in this front seat is holding us accountable. Well, God's not a dummy, and we should be living accountable to him. His son is the rightful heir to the vineyard. He's the rightful heir to this world. So the questions we must ask ourselves is, who is our vineyard owner? Who is running and motivating what we do? And who are you living accountable to in your life? We should be living accountable to God. We should be willing to submit and to serve. And when we do, it opens our lives to so many blessings that we never could have even imagined. Thank you guys for joining us today. Grace and peace.
Thank you for joining us today. We want to remind you that this Friday is Good Friday. At 12 o'clock and 7 o'clock, we have two identical services. There'll be communion, there'll be classic worship, and there'll be time to reflect and respond upon the events of that day. We will be streaming both of those on YouTube, on Facebook, and on our website. And don't forget, most importantly, this Sunday, 8 o'clock a.m., 9:30 a.m., and 11 o'clock a.m., there are three identical services as we celebrate Easter together. You don't want to miss a moment of any of it, and we'll see you there.